the other reason we're not good at addressing panic is that the conversations always revolve around the cause of it, not the feeling consequence of it.
Peter, welcome to the podcast. What a thrill to have you.
Thanks, Christopher. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we chatted moments before I hit record here, and I'm just excited for the opportunity to take a deep dive with people, and even really to help galvanize this idea of resilience and what to do when we face challenges. So I'm thrilled you're here, Peter.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, we are talking today about developing confidence, but I think perhaps confidence needs a redefinition. I think you provided a great one in your brand new book, The Confidence Map. Let's start right there. Real confidence is what, Peter?
So I think so many of us think of confidence that we know it when we see it. And that to me is the confidence theater that is all over the media and in politics and in entertainment and sports. It's the appearance of success. And that to me is not at all what confidence is. I've spent a lot of time trying to come up with a definition, and I'm not sure I have a definition as much as I have two important elements. The first is a sense of certainty. We need to feel that things are predictable, that we know what's coming, that we can envision, I use the word imagine, what's ahead. And the other is control, that we feel powerful, that we have a sense of preparedness, that we have the tools and resources and the knowledge in order to be successful ahead. And the funny thing about the word confidence is when we say I am confident, what we're really talking about is the future, not the present. That when I'm confident, it's because I think I know what's coming. I think I'm ready for it. And so it's always in the future tense.
So I want to nuance this to make this practical, and this may be jumping ahead a little bit, but we can sort this out here. Confidence, you said, is built by certainty and control. So when we have neither, what do we do?
So when we have neither, first of all, we're inherently anxious. So anxiety and stress arise from the fact that we don't have certainty and control in our lives, or some element of our lives, or something that matters in our lives. And if I look at the way we talk about confidence, we say I have none, some, or too much. So I lack confidence, I am confident, I'm overconfident. And that's not right. When we have uncertainty and feelings of powerless, what we are is vulnerable. And the opposite of confident is vulnerable. When I'm not confident, I have a sense of vulnerability. And so it's the vulnerability that's creating the anxiety that we feel. Something just doesn't feel right. We feel uncertain about what might happen. We don't know if we can do it. And that's the source of stress that people feel in their lives.
Okay. Well, I want to step back just a bit. I'd love to hear some of your backstory that ultimately led us to meeting today around this topic of confidence. You've got a remarkable story, and I'd love to hear more.
Sure. So I spent the first half of my life in financial services. And I have to say, I didn't observe very well what I write about in my book. I missed the forest for the trees. When I turned 45, my son said, "Dad, you're halfway to 90," which it is a life-changing moment. And so I started to look at what was happening at that point in the mortgage market and the housing market, and then what happened during the crisis, trying to figure out, well, why did we do these things? What was it about the way we felt that drove the choices we were making? And all of the arguments and excuses that I started to see about why the crisis happened just didn't hold truth to me. And ultimately, I concluded that it all came down to these feelings of certainty and control. And then it became, so why do they matter? How do they drive the choices that we make? And that's really where I've spent the last decade, is trying to connect the way we feel to what we do. Because it's not a clear pathway all the time. And so I looked at, how do we think? How do our preferences change? How do our stories change? And that begins to help to weave together why we do what we do.
Yeah, that's helpful. I want to go back to certainty and control. What is it? This might sound like a silly question to some, but what is it about certainty and control that are not only enlivening but empowering to us? Why do we hang our hats on certainty and control that generate confidence? Is there something that you learned, as a professor at William and Mary, et cetera? What is it about certainty and control?
Well,
specifically,
yeah, both of them are actionable. We can actually do something about them. If I work with coaches, and so if I'm a coach and a player comes to the sidelines because things aren't going well, and I say, you don't look very confident out there, that's not a very useful framework for a conversation. On the other hand, if I say to that player, what do you need to do to feel more in control when you're there? Now, suddenly we can be talking about specifics. It forces the person involved to step back and say, okay, this is the source of my anxiety. We can do the same thing with uncertainty. I don't feel certain when these kinds of things happen. And so why they're so important to me is that in both cases, we can do something about them. We can take action in our lives when we don't have either certainty or control, or neither. And candidly, Christopher, we spend most of our lives in environments without one or both of those elements. So a lot of self-help books tell you, be confident and you'll be successful. I couldn't think of worse advice. Confidence comes from being successful. In order to be confident, you must demonstrate the ability to generate certainty and control in what you're doing. And it's only once you do that that you will feel confidence and a sense of success. We need to stop telling people that confidence is the precondition to all of these wonderful things in life. It's like, no. Confidence is the reward. And even more so, we need folks, particularly young people today, to get comfortable in environments where they have neither certainty nor control. Because if you can get comfortable in those environments, knowing that you will eventually find the certainty and control you're in search of, well, that's resilience. That's the ability to handle what's coming, good and bad, without being alarmed by it, without getting anxious by it.
We got to stay here. How to get comfortable when we lack certainty and control. What are the tenets of that? Can you walk us through some of the mechanics of how to do that? This is resilience building, as we talked about.
Yeah, so the reason I wrote this book was to create a visual that you could look at it and say, okay, today it's a simple 2x2 box where you have certainty and control, high and low. They form the box. And I'll send you a picture, Christopher, that you can use to accompany this. But one of the things I think that's really helpful is to be able to say, oh, I'm here today. I'm in an environment where I don't have certainty and control. And rather than being frightened by that, to just be able to say, oh, no, I'm here. This is one of the places that I may be today, tomorrow, in my life. Life moves us around. You have a pandemic one moment, you have a dot-com bubble the next. We, again, one of the greatest just misleading tropes of the self-help world is that once you have confidence, you'll keep it forever. That's garbage. You may have confidence today and not have it tomorrow. If I put you on an airplane, you may be confident when you board, but if there's turbulence, suddenly that's going to disappear. And when you're back on the ground, when it lands, as it inevitably will, your confidence is back. So we need to be much more flexible in our sense of certainty and control, recognizing that these are fluid. These are things that are going to change, and rather than being frightened by them and anxious about them, recognize them. And even more so, particularly when we're stressed, we easily accept the idea of overconfidence, that we can be over certain and feel more control than is reasonable. We need to be as open to the opposite end of the spectrum in being underconfident. That when bad things happen, we are naturally underconfident. That we overestimate the uncertainty we're experiencing. We overestimate the powerlessness we feel. One of the things that I did in trying to help my students to understand this was I shared Google search volume. I'm a big believer that what we feel, we Google. That our search,
It's so true.
our search volume reflects how we feel.
Yes.
So whether you realize it or not, every night between 1 and 2 in the morning, our searches for the term anxiety skyrocket. You're not the only one waking up in the middle of the night feeling anxious. There's a natural daily cycle to our anxiety. Shortly thereafter, our searches for panic attack, heart attack begin to rise, because we're thinking, if I'm anxious, then suddenly my mind is spiraling into, well, something's wrong. Maybe I'm having a heart attack. Maybe I'm having a panic attack. It gets more amusing because the searches that we then go for are how to roll a joint, bars open near me, how to meditate, pornography. I mean, all of these behaviors that we then look for to relax, to get comfortable. But the ones that hurt my heart, Christopher, are the other searches that we do, which is, am I fat? Am I stupid? Am I ugly? In these moments of anxiety, our mean voice comes out. We are nastier to ourselves and to others than we should be. I always tell my students around midterms and final exams, be careful. Your ugly voice is going to come out. You're smart. Don't listen to that voice, because that voice only makes a dramatic appearance when you feel bad. So our truths change based on where we are along this map. When you're feeling very confident, you're never saying those things to yourself. But when we don't have confidence, when we're feeling stressed and uncertain, then our mind really wanders into dangerous territory.
You tipped your hat to, and I want to put a pin in this, the me, here, now response to life. I loved that section in the book, but I want to ask you this. You had mentioned the natural daily cycle in response to anxiety. What else do we need to know about that? I've never actually thought about it in that way, but is there anything else that would be helpful to know about this natural daily cycle before we move on?
Yeah, to appreciate that just that cycle is moving your feelings, your preferences, your stories, your actions in ways that you may not be aware of. That, the time to not have an argument with your partner or spouse is between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. because you're both naturally more irritable in that moment.
Wait, that's actually a thing.
Yeah, we're more irritable.
Wow.
If I'm anxious, I'm not going to be interested in cooperation or consensus or trying to resolve a crisis. I'm more likely to create a crisis.
But specifically, like between 1 and 2 in the morning, that's a heightened physiological thing?
Every day. That's what
gosh.
that's what the Google data suggests.
Wow.
And it's Christmas. The intensity isn't as great on Christmas, but that cycle just repeats itself over and over. And some of it you could attribute to darkness, because darkness creates uncertainty. But again, you're not the only one waking up in the middle of the night feeling anxious.
Yes. You've been told, Peter, that you see connections others miss. Now, I want to learn from you in this way. First of all, I want to ask this. Is there a trend to what you see that others miss? And then secondly, how did you develop that unique lens on life? In other words, teach us the approach. That's really cool.
Yeah, so I try to understand how people feel and then what they're likely to do. So let me give you a real life and a real time example. We're recording this on June 26th, so the Monday after the Russian coup attempt this weekend. I was writing to my clients on the 5th of June that we were likely to see potential political upheaval, social unrest, increased aggression coming out of Russia. Why? Why? Because if you go back a year ago, when Putin first invaded Russia, the price of natural gas skyrocketed. And this is going to seem like a bit of a stretched connection, but what the markets were telling us was that we were intensely afraid of what Russia might do, that there was a sense of omnipotence and invincibility to Putin last spring and summer. And you saw that manifest in the markets. And particularly in Europe, people felt intensely vulnerable. Since then, the price of natural gas globally has collapsed. And coming into this month, that price hit lower and lower points where it just felt like it was a washout. So if we felt that he was invincible when the price is high, then we and others were feeling he's vulnerable now. And if you're an authoritarian leader, vulnerability isn't exactly an attribute you want others to feel. And so that sense of vulnerability, to me, made it likely that others would become interested in upending him, that you could see some sort of potential change in behavior. So whether you realize it or not, there are ways to look at you to understand how confident or how vulnerable you may feel. In the case of the Arab Spring, the vulnerability was evident because of food prices. And if you can't afford to eat, I have a pretty good sense of what you're likely to do in response. And we see this over and over, where the vulnerabilities that people are feeling begin to manifest in behaviors that are significant. All social movements arise out of shared feelings of vulnerability. You can look at the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Yellow Vest movement. When we lack confidence, when we feel vulnerable, and we feel vulnerable together, we're going to do something.
Okay, stay here. Say more about vulnerability as a linchpin, because what I really was fascinated by as I read your book, The Confidence Map, is 2 other case studies for which you were able to successfully predict how things turned out using, again, vulnerability as this linchpin. were the 2016 presidential election and then the economic rebound and response in the spring of 2020 during the coronavirus outbreak.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Sure. So during the 2016 election, you could see that as people felt more confident, the popularity of Hillary Clinton rose in lockstep. So as we felt better, Hillary Clinton did better in the polls. When we felt worse, Donald Trump did better in the polls. And ultimately, I said to my clients, this is an election that's going to come down to how we feel. If mood falls, which it did coming into November 2016, Donald Trump will win. It's simply we are voting based on how we feel. And Clinton and Trump were two very different candidates when it came to our feelings, their messages, and so we see this over and over. There are candidates who do really well when we feel good, and then there are political candidates who do really well when we don't feel good. And then again, so vulnerability becomes a big driver, an extreme vulnerability of impulsive and highly emotional behavior. I know when crowds feel vulnerable, when they're acting in a very impatient and dramatic way. And that's what we saw in response to COVID. Everyone was behaving in an intensely impulsive and emotional way. That is what marks the lows in confidence. And panic, I think, is God's way of telling us that the worst is behind us, even though we think the worst is coming.
Say that again. Why?
Yeah. So when we panic, it's in anticipation of what's coming.
Uh-huh.
The reality is that most often when we panic, the worst is already behind us. We're extrapolating the bad and moving it into the future.
Break that apart for me. I've never heard it that way, but I think you're actually going to give us a key to break through some of the anxiety that many of us deal with.
Yeah, so I look at panic as an objective condition. When markets...
Whoa.
Yeah, it's not a subjective condition, it's an objective condition. If I tell you I'm panicking, I'm stating what I think is a fact. And crowds panic a lot. I spend a lot of time in the financial markets. So markets panic. And when you think about why a market is panicking, it's because they think things are only going to get worse. You wouldn't sell if you thought things were going to go back up. And so when I see people panicking and even more so acting on that panicked feeling, that intense vulnerability, ironically, they're telling me things are going to get better very soon.
Can you say that one more time, even just that last statement, because my wheels are turning right now. This is fascinating, Peter.
So when I see groups of people panicking in expectation that things are only going to get worse, I look at that and say, no, things are going to turn around here very soon. Because everybody feels this way, they're acting on those feelings,
yes,
and they're misreading that the worst is really behind us. And I use this with investors. I use this, people look at things like civil war as making things worse. It's like, no. Civil war is what happens after people feel bad. That to me is a sign of that we should be optimistic, not pessimistic. Mm-hmm. So we make these horrible decisions. Particularly, in lows of confidence, our natural impulsive decisions tend to be generally very poor. We hurt ourselves, we hurt others. And if you can just look at the panic that you're feeling, that intense vulnerability, that intense uncertainty and intense powerlessness as a as an objective condition, rather than falling victim to it, you can step back from it to say, oh, I'm rapidly approaching a low in confidence. This is not a time I should act out of despondence, but rather just breathe and allow myself to get through this moment because it will pass.
Are there a few steps that we can employ that allow us to do that reframe quickly? And I might be alluding to the confidence quadrant.
Yep.
And if we are, you can take us right there. But what you just said and what you have said, I think is groundbreaking, actually, and can move us into better decision making. But I'll let you drive the bus.
Yeah, so I think some of it is to say, what are small things I can do right now to take control of my life, to feel more certain? One of them is asking for help. And many people, when they're feeling stressed, think that asking for help is demonstrating weakness. To me, that's a mistaken interpretation. Asking for help is taking control of the situation. It's taking a deliberate step to gain control of what's happening, to regain certainty. So we should never be afraid to ask for help. You know, we should, in fact, deliberately seek help, particularly from those we trust or those who are capable, and those who may be able to empower us, to help us, to give us the skills and abilities that we need to move ahead. You know, one of the quickest ways I know to regain certainty and control in your life is to volunteer, and to volunteer with others in service of others. It sounds really silly, but if I'm doing something good for somebody else, I'm demonstrating to myself that I have certainty and control in something. So I always tell my students during exam week, I said, I know this is going to sound like you don't have time for this, that this is a silly thing to do, but get out of your head and do something nice for somebody else. That will remind you, amid this chaos that you're feeling otherwise, that you know what? I do have certainty in something. I do have control of something, and I'm demonstrating it.
Take us right then, take us to the confidence quadrant then, because I think even for folks joined with us that might feel, oh gosh, this is a little abstract. I love this, but I want to get my head around this. Let's go right to the confidence quadrant and then sort of paint this picture for folks, because even as you did in the book explaining various people's experience on an airplane,
Yeah. So
paint that picture through the confidence quadrant.
sure, and as I said, I'll send you a picture that you can include for
Super
this.
helpful. I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah.
There are 4 boxes, and the upper right box of this 4-box image is what I call the comfort zone. It's an environment where we feel certainty and control in what we're doing. It feels easy to us. We're happy. It's where our successes in life all exist. And time moves really quickly. When they say time flies, it flies in the comfort zone. And so this is a place where we feel good, we feel stable, and it's ultimately where most of us want to spend our lives, and being able to have those feelings of certainty and control. Diagonally down from that, in the lower left-hand corner, is the stress center. And this is where, again, we feel things are uncertain, we feel powerless, there's a real sense of vulnerability. And in the very lower left-hand corner, I call that the trauma zone. That's where we end up. And the cause is immaterial. I don't care if you've been mugged, broken a leg, failed a test. if you whenever we feel that our confidence has been upended, and it can be slowly, it can be quickly, that's where we end up. That's if you've experienced trauma, you've been in that lower left-hand corner. And it's a hard corner to get out of. That sense of powerlessness, the feelings of uncertainty are intense. And once we've been in that corner, we never want to go back. And so you'll see a lot of our behaviors in that lower left-hand corner are intended to address that condition so that we never experience it again. We put fences up around it. We do all that we can. If you look at the advent of the TSA and Homeland Security after 9/11, that was public policy makers' attempt to make sure that America never experiences the vulnerability and uncertainty that we felt on 9/11 again. So those two boxes tend to be where we think confidence exists and doesn't exist. But there are two other boxes that are on this map. The lower right-hand box is an environment where we have certainty but no control. And I call that the passenger seat, because if you've been in the passenger seat of a car or an airplane, you know what that feels like. And you feel great if things are going well, but you can also feel intensely vulnerable when something unexpected happens. And so there's a fragility to that box that we don't feel confident, and we can quickly move to panic. And an airplane is a fabulous example where a little bit of turbulence and suddenly people who are not religious are in prayer.
Yeah.
So that's an environment though that we're in a lot. Many people are in that environment at work because they have a boss who's telling them what to do. Teachers often put students in that box. Some relationships put people in that box. In their worst case, that's an environment of a maximum security prison, where those in that situation feel absolute powerlessness, but there's intense certainty to what's happening. The last box is the upper left-hand box, and I call this the launch pad. This is where we have control but no certainty. All of our financial decisions are made in that box, whether I'm borrowing money, lending money, investing. I'm making a decision today whose outcome is unclear. I have to imagine the future. And I got yelled at by a psychologist once because I talked about, perceiving the future. And he says, no. The future is inherently unknown. It always was, is, always will be. So we have to imagine it. And I think that imagining it is a really useful word because it speaks to the creativity that we have to use every day to be thinking about the choices we're making. And importantly, the future that we imagine is completely consistent with how we feel. So when I see all these ads about in these uncertain times and all of this discussion around uncertainty today, it's like, no. All those ads are telling us, all this media stuff is telling us is we feel uncertain. We're the ones that are uncertain, not the future. Future's always been uncertain. But we're the ones who are telling these stories. And if we feel good, we're not telling those stories at all. We know what's coming. We think we can see well into the future, in a really good way. So we need to be careful not to fall in love with those stories, because those stories are simply echoing our own feelings. They're like, again, am I ugly? Am I fat? Am I stupid? Our stories about the future are a complete mirror with the way we feel.
Yeah, let's make this practical. Teach us how to map our various experiences in life in a way that can bring clarity in a way that can better our lives. In other words, what happens when we map? I'll use another example. Your daughter has this surgery,
Yeah.
and she mapped that whole experience, and she was able to see, oh, I felt better here. This experience was here. And then that actually gave you and your wife information about, oh my gosh, the medical system could have done such a better job here to alleviate some of the stress she experienced. Walk us through that as a case study and example about how we can map our own experiences. And again, folks, I'm going to put a copy of this map, the quadrants rather, at wintoday.tv in the show notes. So go there so you can do that.
Yeah, so I ask lots of people to map experiences. I ask my freshmen to map their senior year of high school. I ask people in the medical community to map, how was your surgery? I ask people on airplanes. I was asking people during COVID, where are you today? And being able to visualize where you are in terms of your feelings of certainty and control is remarkably easy. And so when you start to see these patterns, then you can begin to have a discussion around, well, why did you feel this way? What was it that created those feelings? What was the source of that anxiety? What was the source of that comfort? Because importantly, if you've got things in that upper right-hand corner of the comfort zone, it's like, okay, so what are those? What are the kinds of things that you're doing that make you feel certainty and control in your life? Because in the midst of stress, you need to be doing those as a relief. If it's playing video games, or if it's pounding out notes on a guitar, or going for a run, being very clear that my comfort zone involves these kinds of activities is very helpful to know, because you can deliberately seek out those sorts of situations amid the chaotic reality of your life. And those will recharge you. Those will give you energy and calm your brain. Confidence is a cognitive condition as much as an emotional one. And so if you can spend time in the comfort zone, that's going to give your brain some really useful downtime, which it needs. Because in the stress center, it's trying to figure out everything. It's going crazy trying to understand all this uncertainty and powerlessness and to figure out what to do. But Christopher, it also works in that stress center. And this is where I end up with fascinating conversations. So people will identify something that puts them in that lower left-hand corner of the stress center. In the case of my daughter, she had major life-changing surgery. And I thought it was going to be the surgery that created the maximum stress from her experience. And instead, it was that moment where they put a tube down her nose and into her stomach to suck out what was going on in her stomach. And she said she felt like she was trapped, that she was drowning. It was sort of the medical equivalent of being waterboarded. And so when we talked to the doctors about this, they said, oh, no, there are many things we can do. We can numb it. We can give you, anti-anxiety meds. And it's like, well, why didn't you? And individuals, organizations, policymakers, we don't spend enough time understanding what creates the stresses in people's lives. I had a woman who ran a meat processing plant, and with very high turnover. And she took the concepts of the book and she started to ask her employees, what would it take for you to feel more certainty and control on the job? And they came back and said, having time to get things like a taillight fixed. And she was like, what? She said, and they said, yeah, if I have a broken taillight, the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to get pulled over. So now I have a taillight and a ticket. And if I have to appeal the ticket, now I have to go to court, which means now I need childcare and a day off. And so suddenly this small, insignificant relatively insignificant vulnerability was creating chaos in their work life. And she said, oh, we can address this. And so she came up with ways for them to take, half an hour to get those things addressed. And turnover in her office or in her plant dropped dramatically. People, by feeling less vulnerable in their lives outside of work, they were more productive and felt more in control on the job.
This is fabulous. Okay, so if we're talking about building confidence and then learning the skill of diagnosing and addressing these vulnerabilities that lurk beneath the surface within our heart, I just want to set this up as a hypothetical example. Maybe we can work this out in real time for the sake of those joined with us, Peter. So let's just say we face a really significant relationship breakup or a sudden job loss. And someone comes to you and says, hey, Peter, I just experienced this. Help me navigate this. Walk us through that. Walk me through that. What do we do?
So the first thing I would say is know where you are. You are now in the lower left-hand corner.
Me here now.
And you are in me here now mode. So every decision that you're going to make is going to be focused on right here, right now, and all about you. So your focus on the future is gone. In the case of a breakup, you're likely now to make really bad food choices. You're likely to make a number of really bad life choices because you're not giving any consideration to the future. So you need to be careful. And you need to now start to do things that are actionable. If you've lost your job, so how do we help you to get unemployment? How do we help you to start to take control of the situation? And in small, simple ways, nothing abstract, nothing dramatic, just what would be the next immediate step that could be taken, small next steps, and to start to build a chain of very small little steps that essentially say, this is the low. Look, we're going to just make incremental progress, and we're going to celebrate that progress too. After my daughter's surgery, she went onto the the elliptical, and I think she was on it for a minute or two, and she's just defeated. It's like, no, that's today, and tomorrow you're going to get on this, and we're going to keep track. And if it's another 10 seconds, we're going to celebrate those 10 seconds like it was an Olympic gold medal. And then, because the comparisons need to be very immediate and just against what you did the last time. Stop comparing yourselves to others. Stop comparing yourselves to who you were before the experience. You need to bring things into an immediate me here now mindset, because that's where you're going to be.
Yeah, let's stay here before I move on. Anything else that we need to know about me here now, how to employ it, what we need to know about it?
So if you're in me here now mode, that's another way that your mind is telling you, chances are you're being underconfident. You're being mean to yourself. If you can't think brightly about tomorrow, then that failure in terms of a story is merely confirming your location in that lower left-hand corner. And remember, you've been there before. You've found ways to move out of it. We all have survived every worst day of our lives up until now. And we forget that we've learned things in those processes through those experiences.
This is interesting as I think about this, even in regard to what we talked about just moments ago, but earlier regarding powerlessness. Anything else that you would encourage us to know about how to navigate the rough waters of powerlessness?
Yeah, so we so often blame ourselves or blame others for fostering those feelings of powerlessness. somebody did this and now I feel powerless, or I made a terrible mistake and now I feel powerless. What we ignore in those situations is that to remain powerless is a choice. Unless you are physically imprisoned, it is our choice to remain powerless. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy to regain control. I mean, we may need tools, we may need skills, we may need coaching, we may need time. We may have to try and fail in order to regain control. But, and these were the hardest words of the book to write, but to remain powerless is our choice, not those we may blame who put us there. Yes, they put us there. We can blame them, but now that you're there, it's on you to do something. And here, again, find a coach, find others who are in that position. Realize that you don't have to do it alone. And often, doing it together is immensely empowering. If you look at the women who were behind the Me Too movement, they went from environments of powerlessness that they felt was individual to a feeling that was shared, and then together were successful in regaining control of their lives because they acted as a group.
Is there a recognizable pattern to panic if we know what to look for?
So panic is any time our confidence is suddenly upended. We typically are somewhere in the upper right-hand corner where we feel certainty and control in our lives one moment and then not in the next. And again, the useful thing to me about panic is it's telling us that we're about to arrive at the terminus, at the lows. And as somebody who's experienced panic attacks in my life, it's been very helpful to go, oh, that anxiety that you're feeling is going to pass, is a function of the stories that are now swirling in your head. So work to change the stories, and to realize that I'm being underconfident. Can I breathe? Am I, let's step back to the basics. And being able to identify and to just be comfortable being uncomfortable. That has been some of the best awareness that I've gained by mapping things in my own life, is to just be comfortable being uncomfortable. That is okay. That's not weakness. That's not, it's not, chances are you're not having a heart attack. You're just in an experience in your mind where you somehow feel a sense of powerlessness and uncertainty.
Yeah, how do we get to that place? I was thinking about that in my own life recently. Becoming comfortable, being uncomfortable. How do we get there?
You get there by appreciating that you've been there before, that this is nothing new in your life.
The valleys.
The valleys, no.
Yeah,
Again,
okay.
We move around. The other thing to consider is to reframe the anxiety from stress just to excitement. That your body's excited. To take away the negative connotation to just, my body's excited today. I'm feeling very amped up today. And to, again, be comfortable with that excitement. If you're excited about, because you're going to a party, you don't step back and are fearful of it. You're energized by it. So just think about it as excitement. And then, as I said before, are there small things you can do to regain a sense of control? If the room feels warm, go outside, move, just do something to demonstrate to your mind that you do have an element of control.
Okay, so, and you wrote this in your book, given the frequency with which we experience panics, you would think we would be great at managing them, but we're not. So, like, what's under the hood? Why haven't we matured in that way thus far?
Because two reasons, I think. One is we are encoded when we feel uncertainty and powerless to do something. That our fight and flight response is driven by panic. And so if you didn't panic when the bear is outside your tent, you wouldn't do anything. So we need that heightened stress in order to mobilize impulsively and emotionally in response. The other reason we're not good at addressing panic is that the conversations always revolve around the cause of it, not the feeling consequence of it. So in a crisis, we focus on the problem, the broken, the thing that broke, not the feelings that arose because something broke. And I firmly believe that in a crisis, the crisis isn't over until those feelings have abated. Just because you've put the fire out doesn't mean the crisis is over. The crisis won't be over until you calm down, till the crowd calms down. And to me, this is the difference between curing a disease and healing a patient. The disease can be cured often quickly. I can set the bone. I can give you medicine. There are things that we can do in the medical world that move very quickly. But the patient isn't healed until the patient feels a sense of certainty and control again in their lives. And so whenever I'm talking to the medical community, I always emphasize your job needs to focus on the healing side of this process, making sure that the patient, as they're leaving a hospital, has a sense of certainty and control in what's going to happen next in their lives.
Panic management, then, what does that require of us? In other words, how do we hit pause in a state of panic so that we're not making rash decisions?
To look at panic and to remind yourself, first of all, I shouldn't be making those rash decisions. Anytime I'm panicking, to be very clear, this is an objective condition.
That's it.
In which these are things that I should do and these are things I shouldn't do. I should be very careful about following others who may not have my best interests in mind. That environment of low certainty and low control is sadly an environment where predators graze. They love nothing more than people feeling weak. So we need to remember that. We need to be careful in terms of our own fight and flight instincts. Don't start a fight. Don't get into a fight. Be comfortable walking away.
I want to run full circle where we began today. I like your advice that at the end of the day, we must become more resilient than confident.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think we need to stop this tiresome, exhausting search for confidence. That it is inherently elusive and temporary. And if we can accept that every day we're moving around, that real life takes us in all four of these boxes, in a sort of a Christmas tree knot path. It's not a straight journey. If you've learned to ride a bicycle, you realize that experience moves you around in tortuous ways until finally you figure it out. But Resilience is a mindset, I think, that comes from being aware that you move, accepting that you move, appreciating that you've moved before and that you found your way back. And to remember the skills that you used to regain control, the skills that you used to regain certainty, because the skills can be applied to different situations. Be patient with yourself and others. Appreciate that you're naturally going to be impatient and feel the sense of urgency when you're in that lower left-hand corner. But if you can endure initially, but eventually tolerate those experiences, then you stop falling into these doom cycles. And I need to emphasize, Christopher, that we live in a culture today that wants people in those doom cycles. So part of it may also be pulling back from the things that create agitation. Because there's big business that makes a lot of money keeping you feeling anxious and uncertain, keeping you feeling powerless and uncertain. So just realize that that echo chamber that you may be in is feeding back and reinforcing your feelings of powerlessness and uncertainty.
Well, that's a powerful place to put a period on this conversation to, Peter, because I think what your tool, the quadrant, enables us to do is escape that echo chamber. It's sort of like pulling subjectivity out of the ether, and by writing them down, we can see things objectively and therefore create a more effective, more helpful narrative. Is that what I hear you saying?
Absolutely. To not, our stories, our feelings, and our actions exist in equilibrium. And so listen to your stories, because those stories are saying something about how you feel. And if change the story, and you change how you feel, and you change your actions.
Wow, what a great place to land. Peter, anything else that we haven't covered today, or anything else we missed that's just pertinent for people to leave with today? What a fabulous, fabulous conversation with you.
I would say, Christopher, I haven't figured it all out. This is not, I'm a fellow journeyman in all of this, but I have found it incredibly helpful to others and to myself to be able to visualize where I am, and to use that in ways so that I don't fall victim to my own poor gut decisions.
Well, folks, again, wintoday.tv. I'm going to put a copy of the quadrant there in the show notes. Also share it on social media, obviously giving Peter credit for it, because I think this could be rather transformative. But Peter, anything else today? This has been fabulous.
No, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Christopher.
Tell people where to stay connected with you if they want to track with you online.
Sure. So I have a website, peteratwater.com. I also am on social media, on Twitter, which is @Peter_Atwater. And I occasionally write things for LinkedIn as well. So you find
awesome.
me there.
Peter, thanks for being here today. What a conversation.
Thank you so much, Christopher.